In 1905, a man stepped off a freight train in West Orange, New Jersey. He had no money, no appointment, no credentials. His clothes were covered in soot because he had not ridden that train as a passenger. He had ridden it hidden in a boxcar because he could not afford a ticket. He walked into the laboratory of Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor alive, and announced that he had come to go into business with him, not to work for him, not to sweep his floors, to become his partner. Edison later said, the man looked like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in his face, some quality of absolute, unreasonable certainty that made Edison give him a job anyway, a menial job, cleaning, sorting, nothing. That man was Edwin C. Barnes, and he took the job. Then he waited. Months passed. Nothing. A year passed. Nothing. 2 years. 3. 4. He was still a nobody in that building, still doing work no one respected, still watching a door that never opened. 5 years. Then Edison's team finished a machine called the Ediphone, a dictating device. The sales force looked at it and refused to sell it. They said it was strange. They said no office would want it. They said it would fail. Barnes said he would sell it. He sold so many that Edison gave him exclusive national distribution rights. Edwin C. Barnes, the tramp from the boxcar, retired a wealthy man. He had become exactly what he said he would become on the day he arrived with nothing. A young journalist named Napoleon Hill heard that story and asked a question that would consume the next 20 years of his life. What was actually happening in that man's head for 5 years? Today we are going through Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. 13 principles, 6 fears, 1 story about a gold mine that I think is the most important thing in the book. I'll name each principle as we reach it, so you can follow along whether you're watching or just listening. This is one of the strangest success stories in publishing history. It was released in 1937, in the middle of the Great Depression, the worst economic moment in modern American history. A book about getting rich, published to a country standing in breadlines. It should have died on the shelf. Instead it sold, and kept selling for 90 years. Estimates put it somewhere between 20 and 100 million copies. It has been credited, fairly or not, with producing more self-made millionaires than any other book ever written. And near the end, I'm going to tell you the part of this story that most channels leave out entirely. The part about Napoleon Hill himself. Stay for it, because it changes how you should read everything before it. Before the 13 principles, you need to know where they came from. In 1908, Napoleon Hill was a young magazine writer sent to interview Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, one of the richest men who had ever lived. The interview was scheduled for a few hours. It lasted 3 days. Somewhere in that conversation, Carnegie made him an offer. He said the principles that build great fortunes were not secret and not mystical. They were repeatable, but no one had ever written them down. Carnegie wanted someone to interview the most successful men in America, extract the pattern, and publish it. There was a condition. Hill would receive no money, not $1. Carnegie would provide introductions, his name, his network, his access, and nothing else. The work would take about 20 years. Then Carnegie pulled out a stopwatch. He gave Hill 60 seconds to decide. Hill answered in 29. Carnegie later admitted he had been timing him deliberately. Anyone who needed more than a minute to commit to something that large would never have the persistence to finish it. Whether that stopwatch was real or a piece of storytelling Hill polished over the years, the lesson stands as the spine of the entire book. The speed of your decisions reveals the state of your convictions. Hill spent the next 2 decades interviewing Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, John D. Rockefeller, Woodrow Wilson, Charles Schwab, William Wrigley, F.W. Woolworth, King Gillette, the men who built industrial America. He was looking for the thing they all had in common. And here is the uncomfortable part of what he found. It was not intelligence. It was not education. Several of them barely had any. It was not money to start with. It was not luck, though luck appeared constantly. What they shared was a specific way of holding an idea in the mind. Hill opens the book with a claim that sounds like poetry and is meant as engineering. A thought is a physical thing, not a decoration in your head. A thing with consequences, capable of assembling money, people, and circumstances around itself when it is combined with definiteness of purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for its outcome. That word, burning, is doing enormous work. Hill is not describing wanting. Everyone wants. Wanting is the cheapest commodity on earth. He's describing obsession. Which brings us to the first principle. Principle 1. Desire. There's an old story Hill uses that has been told about several commanders across history, most famously Hernán Cortés, landing in Mexico in 1519. The soldiers come ashore. They face an enemy vastly larger than themselves, and their commander gives one order before the battle: burn the ships. Not some of them, all of them. The vessels that brought them there, the only route home, set on fire in the harbor, while the men stand and watch. The message is total: we win, or we die here. Retreat has been physically removed from the list of available options. That is Hill's definition of desire. Not hope, not preference. The deliberate destruction of your own escape routes. He argues that most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they keep a way out. They start the business while keeping the job. They pursue the goal while quietly preparing the excuse. And the mind, sensing that failure is survivable, never generates the intensity required to succeed. Hill gives a 6-step method for converting desire into money, and it's worth hearing precisely, because the specificity is the whole point. 1. Fix in your mind the exact amount of money you want, not a lot, not enough, a number. 2. Determine exactly what you will give in return. There is no such thing as something for nothing. 3. Set a definite date by which you intend to possess it. 4. Create a definite plan and begin acting on it immediately, whether or not you feel ready. 5. Write all 4 of those into one clear, short statement. 6. Read that statement aloud twice a day, once before sleeping, once on waking. And as you read it, see and feel yourself already in possession of the money. That last instruction is the one people skim past, and it's the mechanism. The reading is not the point. The emotional state during the reading is the point. Hill's evidence for how far this can go is personal, and it's the most affecting story in the book. His son Blair was born without ears, not damaged ears, no natural hearing apparatus at all. Doctors confirmed the child would be permanently deaf and mute. Hill refused the diagnosis. Not out of denial, he claimed, but as a discipline. He decided the boy would hear. He told the boy constantly that his condition was an advantage, that his deafness would give him something other children didn't have. He never once permitted the child to learn sign language, and he never permitted him to think of himself as handicapped. Blair developed partial hearing. Later, he was fitted with an electronic hearing device that opened up sound to him almost fully, and he went on to work for the company that made it, helping other people with the same condition. Now, a modern audiologist would tell you Blair likely had residual bone conduction hearing that developed regardless of what his father believed. That's probably true. But Hill's claim is not that belief created an ear. His claim is that belief determined whether the boy spent his life participating or spent it hiding. And that claim is much harder to argue with. Principle 2. Faith. In 1901, an Italian inventor told his friends he had found a way to send messages through the air without wires. His relatives had him examined by doctors. They believed he had lost his mind. They took him to be evaluated, because the claim was so obviously impossible that the only reasonable explanation was mental illness. That man was Guglielmo Marconi. Within a few years, he had transmitted a signal across the Atlantic Ocean, and every radio, every television, and every mobile phone that has ever existed descends from what he built. Hill's point is not that Marconi was right and the doctors were wrong. His point is what Marconi had to hold in his head during the years when he was the only person on Earth who believed it. And here is where Hill breaks from almost everyone who came before him. He argues that faith is not something you are born with, and not something you sit and wait to receive. It is a state you manufacture, deliberately, through repetition. He says faith and fear are the same machinery running in opposite directions. Both are states of mind. Both are built the same way, by repeated thoughts delivered with emotion, until the mind stops questioning them. The person paralyzed by the fear of poverty built that fear the same way the entrepreneur built their confidence. Same process, different input. Which means faith is a skill, not a gift. And if it's a skill, there has to be a method. That method is the third principle. Principle 3. Autosuggestion. Autosuggestion is Hill's name for the deliberate feeding of instructions to your own subconscious mind, through statements repeated with emotion until they are accepted as fact. In 1937, this sounded like mysticism. Today, a cognitive behavioral therapist would recognize most of it immediately. The modern name for the idea that you become what you repeatedly tell yourself is cognitive restructuring, and it is one of the most evidence-supported interventions in clinical psychology. Hill's model runs like this. Your subconscious does not evaluate whether an instruction is true. It accepts what is delivered repeatedly and with feeling, and then it begins quietly filtering reality to match what you notice, what you consider possible, which opportunities register as opportunities, and which ones pass by completely invisible to you. Which means the process is already running in everyone listening to this, right now. It has been running your entire life. The person who has told themselves for 15 years that they are bad with money is not making a neutral observation. They are running an autosuggestion program with total consistency and excellent results. Hill's argument is simply this: if the machine is running anyway, take the controls. And he adds a warning that gets far less attention than it deserves. The emotion matters more than the words. Words repeated without feeling produce nothing at all. He compares it to posting an empty envelope. The delivery happens, but nothing arrives. This is also where the most quoted sentence in modern self-improvement appears. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Which is either the most empowering sentence ever written or a dangerous oversimplification. And it depends entirely on the sentence that comes after it, because Hill immediately clarifies that none of this replaces work. It is what makes the work survivable. Principle 4. Specialized knowledge. During the First World War, a Chicago newspaper printed an editorial calling Henry Ford an ignorant pacifist. Ford sued for libel, and in court, the newspaper's attorneys decided to prove the accusation. They would put Ford on the stand and expose him as an uneducated man. They asked him general knowledge questions: history, basic academics, who was Benedict Arnold, how many soldiers Britain sent to America, question after question, designed to humiliate him. Ford took it for a while. Then he leaned forward and said, in substance, that if he ever actually wanted to answer a question like that, he had a row of electric buttons on his desk, and by pressing the right one, he could summon a man who could give him the correct answer to any question about the business he had devoted his life to. So why, he asked, would he fill his own head with general knowledge, when he was surrounded by men who could supply him with any fact he required? The courtroom went quiet. The question had answered itself. And that is the fourth principle. General knowledge is nearly worthless for accumulating money. Specialized knowledge is not. And critically, the knowledge does not have to be inside your own skull. Ford didn't know the answers. Ford knew who did. That is a different skill, and a more valuable one. Hill is direct about what this means for education. He points out that a degree is largely a collection of general knowledge, and that a man may be broadly educated and permanently poor. Knowledge on its own is potential power and nothing more. What converts it into money is organization and direction toward a definite end. He also makes a point that lands harder today than it did in 1937. The knowledge you need is almost never the problem. It is available, it is cheap, and most of it is free. The scarce thing has always been knowing precisely which knowledge you need and being willing to go and get it long after school has ended. Principle 5. Imagination. In the 1890s, A pharmacist bought a formula and an old black kettle from a struggling druggist for a couple of $1,000s. He invented nothing. The formula already existed. The druggist had been sitting on it, unable to make it into anything. What the pharmacist added was an idea about what that formula could become, and that kettle became Coca-Cola. His name was Asa Candler. Hill splits imagination into two kinds, and the distinction is genuinely useful. Synthetic imagination rearranges things that already exist. It invents nothing. It recombines. Creative imagination produces true novelty. Hunches, flashes, insight that seems to arrive from nowhere. And here is his observation. Almost every fortune ever built was built with the first kind, not the second. Woolworth did not invent retail. He rearranged it into the 5 and 10 cent store. Gillette did not invent the blade. He made it disposable. In every case, the raw material was lying around in public view, visible to everybody, picked up by one person. The ingredients were never scarce. The imagination to combine them was. Principle 6. Organized planning. Henry Ford once told his engineers to build him an 8-cylinder engine cast in a single block. They told him it was impossible. He told them to produce it anyway. They worked for 6 months and got nowhere. Another 6 months. Nothing. Every engineer on that team was certain the thing could not be done, and every one of them was, by the standards of the day, correct. At the end of the year, Ford told them to keep going until they succeeded, no matter how long it took. They found the way. The Ford V8 became one of the most successful engines in automotive history. This is the 6th principle, and it is the most unglamorous idea in the book, which is exactly why it's the most realistic. Hill says your first plan will fail, so will your second, and your third. He says that when a plan fails, it means one thing only, and it is not what you think it means. It does not mean the goal was wrong, it means the plan was faulty. Build another one. A man is not finished when he is defeated. He is finished when he quits. Hill also lists the major causes of failure in leadership, and several of them read like a modern management textbook. Unwillingness to do work you would ask others to do. Expecting to be paid for what you know, rather than what you do with it. Fear of competition from the people below you. Emphasizing authority instead of understanding. And needing a title in order to command respect. The real leader, he says, leads by consent and by sympathy, never by force. But a plan is only worth anything if somebody actually commits to it. Which brings us to the principle Hill considered the most destructive when it's missing. Principle 7. Decision. On a summer day in 1776, 56 men sat in a room in Philadelphia and signed a document that, under the law of the time, was an unambiguous confession of treason against the British Crown. The penalty for that crime was death. They were not signing a political preference. They were putting their own names, in ink, on a capital offense, in a building the British Army could reach. Hill calls it one of the most consequential decisions ever committed to paper, and he uses it to make his central point about the 7th principle. Decision is the habit that separates successful people from everyone else, and indecision is the disease that destroys more human potential than any other single cause. He puts it starkly. Across thousands of people he claimed to have studied, the failures shared one trait almost universally. They reached decisions slowly, and then changed them quickly. Successful people did the exact opposite. They decided fast and changed course slowly, if at all. Then, he adds an observation that stings. People who lack decisiveness are almost always heavily influenced by the opinions of other people. They collect opinions. Each opinion adds friction, and eventually, the friction becomes paralysis, and they call it research. His prescription is blunt. Keep your plans to yourself. Tell the world what you intend to do by doing it. Use your eyes and ears more than your mouth. And remember the stopwatch. 29 seconds. Principle 8. Persistence. This is the one the whole book is built around. During the gold rush, a man named R.U. Darby and his uncle went west with a claim in Colorado. They dug. and they found a genuine vein of gold ore. They quietly covered the hole, went home, and raised money from relatives and neighbors to buy the machinery needed to bring the ore out. The first car of ore was shipped. The smelter confirmed it. One of the richest finds in the state. A few more cars would clear the debt. After that, the profit would be enormous. They drilled on, and the vein disappeared. It simply stopped. They kept drilling, desperately now, following nothing at all. Eventually they gave up, sold the machinery to a junk dealer for a few $100s, and went home. The junk man did one thing they had not done. He hired a mining engineer to survey the site. The engineer took his measurements and found a fault line. The vein had not ended. It had shifted. It was continuing exactly 3 feet from where Darby and his uncle had stopped digging. The junk dealer took millions of dollars in ore out of that mine. Darby went into insurance sales, and every time a prospect said no to him, he thought about 3 feet, and he did not stop. And he became one of the highest-earning insurance men in the country. He said afterwards that stopping 3 feet from gold was the most profitable education he ever received. Hill's second persistence story is smaller, and I think it's sharper. Darby was working at his uncle's grain mill when a child, the daughter of one of the tenant farmers, walked in and said her mother had sent her for 50 cents. The uncle said no, and told her to go home. She didn't move. He said it again, louder. She didn't move. He stood up, furious, and started toward her with a barrel stave in his hand. And the child looked up at him and said, very quietly, that her mother had to have that 50 cents. The man stopped. He stood there. Then he reached into his pocket, gave her the money, and sat back down. Darby said he never forgot it. A grown man, in his own building, defeated by a child who simply would not move. That is Hill's entire thesis on persistence. Not aggression, not volume, the refusal to be relocated. He backs it with the obvious names. Edison failing thousands of times before the lamp worked. The novelist Fannie Hurst collecting 36 rejections from a single magazine before the 37th submission sold. And then he says something that reframes all of it. He suggests that life tests people deliberately, with temporary defeat. That defeat functions as a filter, removing everyone who was never truly committed, so that whoever continues finds the road ahead of them strangely empty. Whether that's true about the universe, or just a very useful thing to believe at 2 a.m, is a question you'll have to answer for yourself. Principle 9. The Mastermind. Andrew Carnegie was once asked how he built the largest steel operation in the world, when he personally knew very little about the manufacture of steel. His answer was that he surrounded himself with about 50 men who did. Hill calls this the mastermind, a group of people coordinating in a spirit of genuine harmony toward a definite purpose. His claim is that when 2 or more minds work in real alignment, something appears that is not present in any one of them alone. A third mind, effectively, greater than the sum. Strip out the metaphysics, and the practical core survives completely intact. Access to other people's knowledge, other people's experience, and other people's networks is the fastest multiplier available to any human being. Ford, Edison, Firestone, and Burroughs famously took camping trips together. 4 of the most consequential industrialists of the era, sitting around a fire, casually handing each other decades of hard-won judgment. But notice the condition Hill insists on, because most people ignore it. Harmony. A group in friction produces less than those same people would produce alone. A mastermind full of ego and competition is not a mastermind, it's a committee. Carnegie chose his own epitaph. It says, in essence, that here lies a man who knew how to gather around him people more capable than himself. The richest man of his age wanted that to be the sentence that survived him. Principle 10. Sex Transmutation. And this is the most misread chapter in the book. Hill's argument is that sexual energy is the most powerful biological drive human beings possess, and that it can be redirected, channeled into creative, artistic, or commercial output instead of being spent. He claims that most men of great achievement did not become truly effective until after the age of 40, because it takes decades to learn to redirect that energy rather than dissipate it. Modern psychology has a related concept, and it is not a fringe one. Freud called it sublimation. The general idea that a powerful drive can be rerouted into productive work is not controversial. Hill's stronger claims here are much shakier, and I'd hold them loosely. But the practical residue is real. Enormous energy is available to you, and it goes somewhere whether you direct it or not. Principle 11. The subconscious mind. Hill describes the subconscious as a garden. If you plant it deliberately, it grows what you planted. If you don't, it does not sit idle. It grows whatever seeds happen to blow in. His argument is that your subconscious is running continuously. It makes no distinction between constructive and destructive input, and it will accept whatever is delivered most often and most emotionally. Which means neglect is not neutral. If you do not deliberately plant something, your environment will plant something for you. Your feed, your colleagues, the conversations you didn't choose. Principle 12. The brain. This is the most dated chapter in the book, and I'll be honest about that. Writing in 1937, Hill describes the human brain as a broadcasting and receiving station for thought, literally transmitting and picking up signals from other minds. The physics of that claim has not aged well. But underneath the dated language, there's an observation worth keeping. Ideas move between people constantly, and the group you spend your time in shapes what you believe is possible far more than you notice. You do not need a radio theory of the mind to see that happening. Principle 13. The sixth sense. Every night, Napoleon Hill held a meeting. He would sit alone and convene a council of 9 men: Lincoln, Emerson, Edison, Darwin, Napoleon Bonaparte, and others he admired. He would speak to them, ask them questions, address each one directly, and ask for the specific quality he wanted from them. He was careful to state that he knew they were imaginary. He wasn't claiming contact with the dead. He wrote that the meetings eventually became so vivid they unsettled him, and he stopped them for a period. Hill calls this the sixth sense. Intuition, the hunch, the insight that arrives fully formed with no traceable reasoning behind it. But what he's actually describing has a much less mystical name today: mental modeling, asking what a specific person you respect would do in your exact situation. You are not contacting anyone. You are forcing your own mind out of its default pattern and into a different one, and that is a real technique, used by people who would never touch a book like this. Hill closes the book with what he calls the 6 ghosts of fear: poverty, criticism, ill health, the loss of someone's love, old age, and death. He argues these are almost never generated by you. They are inherited or absorbed, handed down by family, absorbed from the people around you, and then carried for a lifetime as though they were your own conclusions. And he traces the sequence precisely. Indecision hardens into doubt. Doubt hardens into fear. It happens so gradually that most people never notice it happening. He reserves his sharpest words for the fear of criticism, because it is the one that stops people before they attempt anything at all, not the fear of failing. The fear of being seen failing. Now the part I promised you. Napoleon Hill's own biography does not survive careful examination. Researchers who have gone through the records have found no documentary evidence of that 1908 meeting with Carnegie. Hill was involved in a long string of failed and collapsed business ventures. There were fraud allegations. There were long periods where he appears to have been broke, while selling a book about getting rich. That matters, and you should know it. But be careful about what conclusion it actually supports. It does not automatically make the principles worthless. Persistence, definiteness of purpose, specialized knowledge, mastermind networks, controlling your own inner narrative. None of these are invalidated by their author's character, and several have since found support in research he never lived to see. What it does mean is this: treat the book as a set of tools, not as scripture. Desire, decision, planning, persistence, the mastermind. Those are load-bearing. Be far more skeptical of the parts suggesting that thought alone moves the physical world. Thought without action already has a name, and the name is daydreaming. The most useful reading of Think and Grow Rich is that it is a psychology book wearing a finance book's jacket. It is not really about money at all. It is about the interior conditions that let a person keep going long enough for their work to compound. Come back to Edwin Barnes for a second. 5 years, sweeping floors in a building where nobody thought he was anybody. The thing worth noticing is not that he got lucky when that dictating machine appeared. The machine was going to appear regardless. That was Edison's laboratory. Machines appeared constantly. The thing worth noticing is that he was still in the building. Everyone else who ever wanted to work with Edison went home. That's the entire difference. That's the whole secret. The book takes 300 pages to describe. Most opportunities are not missed because people fail to see them. They're missed because the person had already left the room. So here's my question for you. What are you currently 3 feet away from? What did you stop digging on? The business, the skill, the manuscript, the relationship, the training, where you may have been far closer to the vein than you will ever know. Put it in the comments. I read them, and it's honestly the most interesting thing that happens under these videos. If this gave you something worth sitting with, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We break down one great book like this every week. Thoughts become things, eventually, but only for the people who stay in the building. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.